We're talking with Mike Costello, who is the head lacrosse coach at Ann Arbor Greenhills and a member of the Michigan High School Lacrosse Coaches Association's Board of Directors and handles the Hall of Fame and is a member of the Hall of Fame and actually is the president of the selection committee, the chairman of the selection committee. We're doing a Hall of Fame conversation in history, and I guess I'm throwing all that out just as a beginning. And first of all, Mike, thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
Thanks, Ray.
And the question I guess I've started with everybody is start in the beginning. And for you, it starts in Sheboygan, of all places.
That's right. Back in 1977, a good friend of mine, Mike Behrman, at the time we were in high school, and he had gone up to Camp Walden in Sheboygan every summer. And it was the summer, I think my sophomore year in high school. Wasn't doing anything, and he said, you know, you ought to come out. It's a lot of fun. So we went up there, and one of the things that they had to offer the campers was lacrosse. And I had never played before, and they had a bunch of wooden sticks, and picked it up and kind of liked it, saw a little bit of success right off the bat, and it was a lot of fun. And interesting story, one of the camp directors was Don Sill, and he ended up starting the program in Novi, and he was a member of the Hall of Fame, and I was fortunate enough to present his wife and family his Hall of Fame flag.
Now, I'm assuming there must have been camp counselors that had something to do with lacrosse, because you don't think of Sheboygan and lacrosse, especially in those days,
right?
As a mix.
There were old Michigan State players that was up there. I think Bob Bogart was up there, Joe Politowicz. They were counselors there,
okay.
And that's where
another activity.
Yep, that's where that kind of connection was.
Where'd you go to high school?
Went to Oak Park High School.
Again, not exactly a hotbed for prep type sports, but different complexion in those days.
Right. They didn't even have a soccer team back in the mid to late 70s, and I was a tennis player. Played golf one year. Played freshman baseball. So I did kind of the traditional things out there.
I've talked to you plenty of times. Is there any correlation between tennis and lacrosse in terms of the motions?
Hand-eye. I think if you want to shoot overhand, it kind of resembles the serve a little bit. But we've had a number of goalies that have been tennis players in the Greenhills program. So it's trying to find maybe that senior, that sophomore that's interested in playing lacrosse. They play tennis, they play doubles, so they're used to having objects coming at them at a high rate of speed, and it just kind of translates. And we've had a few good goalies that have been tennis players.
I think about the mechanics of of all sports are fairly similar, but with a ball coming at high speeds, catching and passing would be the same as hitting a ball back to somebody in lacrosse.
Yeah,
it'd be better than maybe a wrestler from the standpoint of having a ball involved in the sport.
Correct, unless that wrestler happened to be a face-off guy, and we'd love to have that.
Yeah. Right. Go back to biomechanics.
Right.
Strengthen the forearms and the kinds of things. So from Oak Park, you kind of what happened after that?
Went to Michigan State. And my friend said, well, I'm going to try and walk on the Michigan State team. And at that time, which was 1979, they were a Division I program.
Right.
And
a club team who had morphed into a national an NCAA team.
Yeah. Yep. And they, they weren't very good at that time, at least my sophomore year. But when we were freshmen, they were over 500, and they had a number of good players. One of the good players was Kevin Willits, was one of the best players I've ever seen. He was, I think, from North Carolina and went to prep school in Rhode Island. He was amazing.
When you got there in '79, Rich Kimball was then the head coach.
Nevin
Canner was.
Nevin Canner and Boku Hendrickson were co-head coaches.
Okay.
And then Rich was kind of a grad assistant.
When did Rich take over when you were there? Was he ever the head coach when you were there?
The following year.
Okay. Because in the interview we talked to him, again, we talk about this thread about we all kind of lands on us. The athletic director, Doug Weaver, didn't even know that he had a lacrosse team in the first conversation he had with Rich Kimball. He said, well, yeah, as long as we got a team, let's play. So we think of Syracuse playing Michigan State at Duffy, but there was a little more humble beginnings when Rich finally took over, recruiting and the things that go with it. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely, absolutely. When we got started, I think our toughest opponents were the Michigan club team. We played Ohio State, played Notre Dame, but a lot of it was kind of the now Division III Ohio teams. I think we played Ashland, Oberlin. We did play Denison, Ohio Wesleyan, I mean, those two teams have remained.
You know,
Remain tough.
and I made this point in a couple other interviews. When some Division III teams were every bit as good as Division I teams, because you didn't have Division II.
Right.
So if you looked at Denison and you looked at some of those teams, even now maybe Limestone, Salisbury, those teams can easily compete with the middle to lower level Division I
Right.
teams. So I think that's an important point to make.
Absolutely.
From that
Absolutely.
standpoint. So you played at State. Obviously, you had any highlights from State?
I played that freshman year, and I'm a kind of a collector, so I've collected and saved a lot of stuff. And Boku would send all the players kind of a year-end, just kind of a sheet with saying, okay, for these particular skills, you'll be rated at this point, where it's 1 is top notch and 5 means you need to really work on it. And I still have that, and it's kind of interesting. So.
What's the difference between a hoarder and a collector? Is there a line?
I think a collector is more specific. Hoarder, it's everything.
Right.
But I've saved all those lacrosse things, and it's kind of fun. But that first year, just learning. I don't think I touched the field. I might have played in the spring break trip, but second year was a little bit better. Showed some improvement, and I guess the highlight was we played. I played on kind of a mixed varsity and JV team, and we went down to South Bend. Both teams played, and JV played the first game, and we ended up winning, which was our first win for both programs that entire year. We won in overtime, and I had 6 goals in the winner in overtime. So that was probably the big highlight.
I found the statistic interesting. In 1980, the NCAA had 42 Division I lacrosse teams. In 2018, they had 127. So a lot of programs were club programs, and a lot of even programs were some post-collegiate teams.
Yeah.
Windsor would probably be the best example of those kinds of things. So it really was, with the exception of the East Coast, it really was evolving in that time frame.
Absolutely.
And the high school, same with here. We had 5 or 6 or 7 teams in that same period.
Right. Interesting connection between the high school and the varsity at that time. The Michigan State JV team, they wanted to play and kind of promote the game. We would play high school teams, and I remember taking a bus, and I don't know who we played. We played one of the high school teams. I don't know if it was Cranbrook or Rice or Country Day, and that would never happen today, where a college JV team is playing a high school team. It just wouldn't happen.
I mean, can you imagine the parents or the athletic director trying to set this thing up?
Yeah.
It was the question, I think we mentioned this before, the question I asked Don Lusk. I asked Don, I said, who's the originator of the sport? I said, you're putting a program together, and there's no other teams to play. Did it cross your mind? And he had to think about it in the interview and went, it really never crossed my mind. I just figured if I, the old Field of Dreams, if I build it, they will come, which, as it turns out, that was true.
Yeah, that is true.
From that standpoint. You were a television, journalism, graphic arts kind of major in Michigan State, right?
Well, eventually, my first thought was going to be a lawyer, pre-law, and that didn't last too long. And then it was communications, and that didn't last too long. And then I decided to go to where I think my passion was. I took photography classes in high school and really loved it, so I was kind of pushed into the graphic design studio art program, and that's what I eventually graduated with.
From State, there's no lacrosse after you come out of school, for the most part, right?
Right.
Maybe talk a little bit about where the weave went from post-college to coaching.
Yeah, you ever see the movie The Natural with Robert Redford? He kind of got out of the game for various reasons, and that's kind of what happened to me. I mean, I was just out of the game, trying to work. My dad passed away, and I got a job at General Motors, and that kind of took my career going that way. Didn't really like the General Motors. That's not what I was wired for. So I said, I'm going to try and do something else. So I was working nights at General Motors and decided to go to the Specs Howard School of Broadcast Arts and kind of changed careers. And back in, I think it was 1990 or whatever, I jumped off. I quit GM with no job and just said, I'm going to try and make it in this business. And then got some production assistant jobs working for corporate television, and then managed to hook on with then Manufacturers Bank, which became Comerica, and then Did that for about 9 years.
Just without a side note, you're teaching now. You went
Teaching
back,
now.
got your certificate to teach. Am I correct?
Well, working on that too.
Working on it.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you have, if you know what you know now, and of course anything as we talk about is hindsight is 2020, would you start out as a teacher?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't know if I would want to change anything because all the experience that I've had, it kind of built me up to this point, and I don't know if I would be the same person with the same insights without that.
I asked the question because you think of teachers and coaches in the same building.
Yeah.
There's 50% of the coaches in Michigan are non-teaching coaches just because of the numbers and how the sports have spread. I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. I tried education. I tried teaching for literally about a month through a college situation, and that was very clear to me very quickly. Even though I came from a family of educators, it'd be very clear to me that teaching and coaching was like Ferraris and watermelons. I did not have the makeup, even though I thought I was a good coach, to impart the knowledge. Education, I give teachers so much credit, is not even closely the same thing. Are you finding that that's fairly close as now as sort of a new teacher at an older age?
Yeah, this is my second full-time year as a full-time teacher. Before I was a substitute teacher.
Right.
And the respect, especially at the elementary level, of what the teachers have to go through as far as preparation and lesson plans and grading and interacting with fellow faculty and administration and parents, and then the actual class time. It's a ton of work.
What level are you teaching now?
Secondary. High school kids,
okay.
and then I have one class of middle school kids.
I have a couple of friends who are younger who are coaching and now teaching elementary. And one day he said, well, I could have any elementary job that I would want. Well, why is that? Turns out that there's very few men teaching at the elementary levels. And I was shocked, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
You think of, younger women, men, well, you think of women coaching.
Right.
And young, I'm going to start this over. You think of women with kids younger than men, and I never really thought of it that way, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, does it make it easier being in a building? I know you're not in the building where you're coaching,
Right.
but you think that makes a difference?
I think it does. I think
See the kids every day.
Yeah, seeing the kids every day and just interacting with them, I think it helps. When I was more of a full-time substitute over at Greenhills, seeing the guys all the time, I think it really helped.
Yeah.
And you have to work past that. You try and keep the communication avenues, whatever you can, open and consistent communication, whether it's email or text or phone call or whatever. I think that helps. That's key these days.
So now you have this hiatus between Michigan State. At some point, lacrosse kind of creeps back in the back door.
Right.
Maybe you can start us at that point.
Yeah, back probably 2000 would be a good point to start. My wife, Gail, said, you know what, I want to get to be involved in our church. And back then, for her, it was the Plymouth First United Methodist Church. She said, why don't you come to some Bible studies? It's the youth group leaders. I think you'd have a good time. So I went there and kind of hit it off with a lot of the leaders. And they said, you should volunteer and become a leader and talk with these kids. And I said, begrudgingly, okay. Little did I know that...
Why were you...
It
wasn't a wheelhouse at the moment.
Not at that time. Not at that time.
Okay.
But God had a plan. God wanted me to be in front of these high school kids for a couple years. And the reason why is, I got to talk to them, understand them a little bit more, and then 9/11 hit, and our church and various churches around the area wanted to have a concert on Sunday to kind of, deal with issues, have some music, think about some other things, but then talk to the kids if they had an issue. So we're at that concert on a Sunday, and I see two kids that I know, Nick Ogle and his friend Brandon Horde. They're playing lacrosse, of all things. So walk over there and said, what are you guys doing? He said, we're playing lacrosse. I said, yeah, know that, but what's all this about? And he said, well, we're going to start a team for Canton High School. And I said, really? That's awesome. I have some experience. I played at Michigan State. I'd love to help out. His eyes lit up. I'd love to have you come out and be an assistant coach.
Divine intervention?
Yeah. I mean, I have no reason to say no. It's absolutely.
But Doubting Thomas to me wants to ask you when you said God spoke to you. Yeah, I was going to, the old joke was, how? And I won't. I get that part. He works obviously in mysterious ways and did this case, because what's the chance if you go into a meeting that you luckily don't want to go to, and there's two kids throwing a lacrosse ball when you probably hadn't seen one in the neighborhood in the previous 5 years. Yeah. So coincidence
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it's divine intervention being what it is.
Yeah, for sure.
So you had this conversation with these kids.
Yeah, and I said, I'd love to do it. And these kids, and actually it was Nick Ogle and his friend, who was a transplant from Oregon, of all places. He comes to Michigan and says, you don't have a lacrosse team here? And Nick said, well, we could start one. And these two kids, they started the program, the first Canton program. They met with the parents, they ordered the uniforms, they went to all these coaches meetings back in 2001, and set up a schedule. They didn't have any home games because the school didn't even recognize them as a program. So they played all the games on the road or neutral sites. They did everything. And the Nick Ogle's older brother was going to be the head coach.
What year are we talking?
2002 was the first season, so all this happened in 2001.
Okay, so this was a time when the Mhslca was growing.
Correct.
There was, I know, Fenton, Waterford, a bunch of those teams that started all about the same time.
Yep.
West Side had crashed. So it was between 2000 and 2005, probably 40 teams, 45 teams, Joe, joined?
I think so, yeah.
Roughly?
Well, this is when, Northville got started, Heartland, Brighton, Okemos, all those teams that are now considered powers, Saline as well. I mean, there was a lot of teams that got their beginnings at that time. So this was like a golden age of the new programs.
Well, we've talked about this before. There was Division I, Division II. There was no Division III and a Division IV at the time.
All right.
Division IV represented most of the teams, certainly by 2005 or 6, 2003 or 4. The Division I and Division II teams had all of the power. They were the board members.
Right.
We had long arguments about whether or not there should be some representation on the board, since they represented 80% of the process. Is that fairly close?
But, thinking back when Lax Power was up and running, they had it broken out. They had Division I, Division II, and then 3, 4, 5. They kind of bunched it in, but then they also made the divisions, and they said that Division 5 was the new programs, Division 4 was kind of the middling, and then Division 3 was more of the experienced programs, but still had...
But they had the one championship for that one group.
Right.
So they called it 4, as I remember, because that was what we had called it at the time. And I used to raise my hand and go, what happened to 3?
Yeah.
I understand it was broken out by Lax Power, but what we thought of was 1 and 2, and then everybody else.
Yeah.
And they were all kind of lumped in, so we had a conversation. I use the skiing model is that 80% of the ski teams in Michigan are located in the southeastern Michigan. At a time, I thought maybe it would be nice to have a championship at Mount Holly, Mount Brighton, wherever it might be. Well, then you get involved in skiing, you understand why state championships are up in Traverse City, Marquette. Well, every 4 years, we go to Marquette 1 year out of 4 to accommodate one team, yet we don't come to Detroit to accommodate 46 teams, 43 teams, whatever the numbers are. Yeah. So equity was part of that discussion. Is that the same?
I remember back in 2002 we were just kind of growing. 2003 we were actually pretty good, and we ended up going to the state finals in Class C, and I'll get some kickback from that, the Don Sill Memorial Tournament.
Right.
And we had a number of good players, and I remember I wanted to send all state recognition for those two kids, and I sent the whole form and sent it out, and then it was basically sent back, said, well, you have no rights to even get all state recognition for your kids because you're not Division I or Division II. We
ran a all-star game at the end of the season at Waterford. You were the head coach of the East. Mark Mealy, I believe, was the head coach of the West. That I think we had probably about 50 kids, 50, 60 kids.
Well, there was an all-star game for the first year in 2002, 2003, 2004. And I remember nominating and sending kids. Right. I think it was out in, it might have been on the west side of the state.
Okay.
For the first one, the very first
2003 is when we ran the one in Waterford.
Right, right.
And we got the information into the Free Press, and we ended up getting, because they had the vote there at the game. Got it on television, got some copies of it, local cable, because I had been in the newspaper business at the time, and got chastised by some guys from the hierarchy above us.
Yeah. Who
do we think we were? And we kind of pointed out that, so the next year they allowed somebody to be on the board from our group, but they picked him.
Yeah.
Based on his lobbying. I always thought that was the inequity of the process, but what do I know?
I sat in, and I don't know, I think it might have been 2003, and I saved the newspaper article. They had the all-state list, and if you look at it, Division I and Division II, the lists are huge. They had maybe 3 attackmen, 6 midfielders, whatever. It was a long list. And I remember for the Division 3, 4, 5, and I think it was Tom Marble who said, we're going to do this, and we only had like 3 people total. I think our all-state team for that was maybe 12
on the official roster.
Yeah, versus 24 or whatever for the others.
Well, we had it. I believe it was in the Free Press, and then the Birmingham Eccentric, the Eccentric chain, ran it in all of their subsidiaries because we just knew guys, right? And it was one of those we were explaining that it was. We had Division I, Division II coaches may get back to you, but this is the Division 3, 4 stuff. One of the questions I want to ask you, did you ever feel in those days inadequate as a coach? And I'm saying privately. Did you ever feel like maybe you're barking up the wrong tree, or you didn't feel like you were part of the game?
Yeah, I knew all those teams were kind of new kids on the block, but
is that a fair question?
Yeah, it was tough, and I think that the point is illustrated when we had those scheduling meetings. Now, back then, Mhsa didn't host, but you just kind of knew this is where you made your schedule. And it was like drops and adds at a college. And I remember trying to get games with teams like established Division I teams. I won't mention any names, but the coaches would barely look at you, and they wouldn't talk to you. And they wouldn't schedule you for sure. And it's like, we're trying to build a program here, playing some good teams to let our kids know, well, this is what we have to do to get better, but here they're not even going to give us that opportunity.
I'm asking the question because we've had this discussion for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And it's not like you're losing sleep over it, but it was, and eventually, as anything else, it works itself through and everybody becomes Mhsa. And talk a little bit about your Plymouth Canton teams. You had them as a co-op for how many years, and then it broke up?
Sure. The first 3 years were the Canton Warriors, and they kind of did the play on the Chiefs. They couldn't take the name Chiefs because the school didn't recognize them.
Where did the Warriors come from?
Brother Rice. The kids knew that Brother Rice was the program to emulate, so they said we're going to be the Canton Warriors. Okay. So we were that for 3 years, and the first year was just kind of developing. I remember we had two girls on the team who played quite well, and they played that first team because the school didn't recognize it. They played for the love of the game. They didn't get a letter. They didn't get anything. We had a barbecue at the end of the year, and that was it. But the second year and the third year, we ended up going to the state title game, played Zeeland that first year in 2003, and then Mattawan 2004.
Okay.
Then the MHSCA took over 2005, and that's when we were officially known as PCS Plymouth Canton Salem Unified.
I was looking through a drawer a couple of days ago, and I found a T-shirt from the 2005 state championships on which it said the first annual. And I also went back and remembered him talking with Tom Rashid over some other stuff a couple days ago, and I said, try to remind him that first annual is an oxymoron, because you can either be first or it can be annual, which you can't have both. And then I still have the original T-shirt, which I apparently never wore. Yeah. I'm not sure why I kept it, but it was gray in nature, and of course I don't fit into it anymore. Because anyway, but it was. I want to use the T-shirt as maybe artwork as part of this series, because I just think it's it was the first year.
Sure.
So first year, you went from Same with me. Went from MSLA to MHSAA. Any thoughts on that process?
The schedule that I remember that our team got was just brutal. The region that they put us in, we ended up playing Ann Arbor Pioneer, Ann Arbor Huron. At that time, they were really good. Catholic Central, Northville, Saline, Okemos, Orchard Lake St. Mary's. It was Novi. It was brutal. But, we kind of muddled through that and then ended up beating Northville in the first round of the playoffs. And then our next game was Brother Rice.
Were you subject to unification rules the first year?
What type of rules?
You can only have 35. You can only have 3,500. Was Plymouth, Canton, Salem one in the MHSA's first year? Were you unification?
Yes.
So you had between the three schools, you probably had 10,000 students, right? Not that many.
Yeah,
I mean,
close.
8
I
to
guess
10 somewhere in there, because each one's got a couple thousand. So
Yeah.
say 6,000.
Yeah.
More than 3,500. When did they start to break apart? Because they gave them a grandfather. The state gave a grandfather rule, I think, for 3 years.
Right.
To be able to break those up. Does that sound right?
We had 3 years, and then they broke us up.
Okay, so that goes back to that.
Yeah.
I say that because we had the first unification ski team, which was Waterford, Kettering, Waterford, Mott, and then it turned out to be Avondale.
Okay.
Because Avondale they had 5 kids that wanted to ski, and it turned out they had 30 kids to ski. So my first ski team as unification, which would have been 2003, I think, I had 60 kids on a ski team.
Wow.
That's a lot of kids when you're only racing 6 boys, 6 girls, and the same as JV. So what do you do with all these other kids?
Yeah.
And it's a lot of kids to teach from that perspective. So the state was working through that unification because that was, I think our unification ski team was 2001 when they decided to have unification for the sport. And I say this because I mentioned this to you the other day. There's a team up north someplace, up in the Keweenaw Peninsula, that has a swim team with 7 teams with a total combined enrollment of a little under 1,000, right? Because they don't have that many. Calumet's got the pool, they all come together. The other end of the sword to make unification, we always think of it as being big and being taken advantage because of too many. Well, it also services the kids on the bottom end
Right.
when there's not enough.
Right.
And it has to, two-edged sword kind of approach.
Mm-hmm.
So you break up then at some point, 2006, 2007.
Let's see, 5, 6, 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
You were still unified in 2007.
Yeah, that was our last year of unification.
Because we played you at your facility, the soccer field, at what would essentially be Plymouth High School, right? Where the state championship soccer field.
Yeah.
And I think you beat us. We had good games. I don't remember what the score was, but
Yeah.
I think you beat us by 3 or 4,
Absolutely.
2 or 3.
Yeah.
My son's senior year. That's the only reason I would remember that.
I want to go back to there was an interesting story at the Canton days. I think the second year or third year, we had a kid that was a midfielder.
Explain what Canton days are.
Canton days were the first three years.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
before the whole
Canton
unification.
days not as a festival, just as a reference to the
Right,
fact.
right. I
Okay,
think those are
sorry.
soccer things.
Gotcha.
We had a player on the Canton team who was a midfielder, and he came up to me at practice one day and he said, "Coach, I've got this guy who would love to assist, would love to help out. He has some lacrosse experience. Can he call you?" And I went, "Sure." He gives me a call. He says, "Hi, this is Kevin. Love to come out and help out. You want to get together? Can I come out to practice the next day?" I said, "Sure, fine." So up walks Kevin Riley, and I had known Kevin probably 20 years before back in Oak Park where we grew up. He was a softball player that hung around with a bunch of guys that I knew. So this was like, oh my goodness,
Small world.
20 years between the two. And he was an integral part in our growth as a goalie coach and defensive coach and kind of good cop, bad cop that kind of motivated the kids. So
6 degrees of separation.
yeah, absolutely. So and that kind
And
of
he's still coaching. He's at
he's a Divine Child.
Divine Child.
He-
After stops at Lawrence Tech.
Lawrence
and-
Tech, and he was the Canton coach. And that
Okay.
kind of goes to the whole separation after the third year of the unified team. We had to go in separate directions. I went to Plymouth, Kevin went to Canton, and then Eric Bilecki went to Salem.
So you had good, solid teams.
We
and somewhere along the line, 2009, your team, you decided in 2010 to go to Ann Arbor Greenhills, where you still are.
Yeah, I think that last year at Plymouth, I kind of got a little sour on the whole parent-run booster club, and I'll leave it at that. And I said, you know what, I'm done, and I resigned from that position.
Well, if it's any consolation, you're probably the first coach in Michigan who's ever had any kind of an issue with a booster club or a parent club, so I get that.
Oh, yeah.
Public to private. I say that because I'd been at St. Mary's, so I know what kind of transition that is. What was the kind of transition for you?
Transition was good, and I had talked to John Kenny, who was kind of a mentor, and he had been at Country Day for a long time, and I figured he was the best person to talk to about making that step from public to private. And he gave me a lot of good advice, and I said, you know what, I think this is going to be a good move for me.
What did he tell you?
He said not to compare teams. He said, don't compare your team with anybody else. Work with what you have and be focused on your goals and make that happen.
Did he talk to you about politics being different between public and private schools? From a coaching perspective?
Not really.
Oh,
Not really.
good.
Not really. And it's good because, and I have to say this, making that move, it's been the best move I've ever could have made at that time. And I've had nothing but support from the administration, from the parents, from the kids. And I got to tell you this, in all honesty, I have not had one parent at Greenhills for lacrosse come to me and say, why isn't my son Johnny playing?
That's pretty amazing.
Oh, it is. I'm blessed.
Having been the only coach that had problems with parents, now having the only coach who's never had problems.
Yeah, right.
That's an interesting swath. You've got 300 kids, give or take, at Greenhills. Is it more difficult to find players when you've got 300 versus somebody who's got 2,000 walking around?
Oh yeah.
To say the least.
Oh yeah. And I like some of the comments from, well, he's at a private school, he can get whoever he wants. Yeah. Well, that's not the case because especially at an independent school like that, where athletics is important, but kids are going there for academics.
Right.
So I've got to we don't have a JV team. We have a very small middle school team, and we may not have a middle school team this year. So my pool is limited, and I've got to take kids that have not played before as ninth graders, and they're on the varsity team. So I've got to build from there. And a lot of times I don't have goalies. I've got to build up goalies and build up the whole roster pretty much.
Has it ever crossed your mind and I'm not saying you have limited resources, I'm just saying a smaller body.
Yeah.
Has it ever crossed your mind that I don't have a chance to win a state championship? Has that ever entered into your brain?
What I share with the players?
You.
No.
You.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not just me. I would think it's maybe 90% of the coaches in the state.
No, the reason I'm asking the question, somebody came up the other day, and it never dawned on me that I'm not competing for a state championship when I had a team that was 3-10 or 18-2. It just never dawned on me because the argument would be, well, at least in one division, with the exception of last year, for the bulk of the careers that we've had as career guys, there's only one team going to win anyway. Yeah. And they had a distinct advantage from not only apparel all the way through it. It never dawned on me that we couldn't win a state championship. And then I got there, kind of thing, with it from that standpoint. I asked the question because I just wondered if it creeps in, and I'm not sure it does. I just think it's maybe in your head you go, well, who's in your region when you get the regional draw?
Yeah.
How am I going to get past that team?
I don't know if that's our ultimate season goal. I would say no. Our ultimate season goal is to improve every day, get better, like one another, support one another. If we can say, you know what, we improved every day. We played to the best of our ability throughout the season. We got better. We had a great time as a team. It's like, well, that's successful. I mean, we don't have to win a state championship to be successful.
And I asked that question for that same reason.
Yeah.
There's some coaches that we both work with and work against that if they don't get to the dance, all the way to the dance, it's not a successful season.
Right.
And I think, how sad is that to some extent? And, there's 139 teams playing, and only 4 are going to end up playing for a finals.
Right.
That means there's 133 losers? I don't think that's the case at all.
Yeah, it's not. And I think that's why we kind of have the regional championships. You can
Yeah.
play for other things, a league championship or a regional championship or whatever. So
Somebody asked me, I'm moving over to a new school, and somebody asked me, when do you want to end your season? I said, well, a lot of it depends on the wind. If we got great wind and warm weather, I'm a sailor in the summertime. If the season ends a little sooner, if we got great weather, if the weather's
Right.
terrible, that's fine as well.
Yeah.
I say that in jest, semi-jest,
Yeah.
for what it's worth. So what has happened with you now at Greenhills? You're happy with you've been there 9 years, coming up on 10,
yeah.
a decade.
It's been great. I've had so many great kids that I've coached. I think, I still talk about a guy named John Lazarsfeld, who I fought tooth and nail to get All-America status, and I finally persuaded Rob Ambrose to kind of vote that way in 2013, and John was named to the All-American team. And turns out he played 4 years at Yale. Unfortunately, he graduated before last year, so he didn't have a chance to play on the national championship team, but he was a part of that growth. And
What a turnaround with that program.
yeah, I mean, he's been great. I've had a number of kids that have gone on to do great things, to be, I think a couple of kids went to Oxford, and just great kids.
Oxford University.
Yeah.
Not Oxford High School.
Right.
In Northern Oakland County.
Right.
To distinguish between
Right,
the two.
that's right. I have to do that.
What's the question I want to ask at this point? Have we gotten better? Are we stagnant? And I say that based on two things. Your observations of that process. Second part is we keep telling everybody that the sport is growing, and by U.S. lacrosse numbers alone, yes, we have pockets that we're growing, but we've sort of hit the pinnacle at the moment of our growth. Now we're going to add some teams in Michigan, and I say overall,
Yeah.
have we hit? Where are we at this point in your mind?
From my view, from when I started coaching, 2002 to right now, we've gotten way better. I think the teams have gotten way better. I think the individual skills, we've gotten better. I remember going to the 2002 championship and watching Birmingham play Rice. Great game. A lot of great kids on those teams. And I look back at those Division 3, 4, 5 teams. There was maybe 1 or 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 kids that were very skilled, that could dictate how a game finished. They were that good. Now we have that many kids on a lot of the teams, and you could kind of key back then. Oh, we'll key on one kid, and we could perhaps win the game. You can't do that anymore. There's so many kids that are playing, not just in the spring, but they're playing in the fall and the winter, and they're dedicating some time to it. And I think as a result, individuals have gotten better, teams have gotten better, and overall, I think from top to bottom, I think the state is better.
Has travel helped or hurt? And that's a mixed question.
Yeah.
You've got good travel teams. You've got some travel teams that are looking for money. And I don't want to get
Right.
into a whole political discussion about their value, but I watched recently some Christmas tournaments, and it seemed like the offense run was the last guy with the ball. And if he had to go through 17 guys because there's four scouts on the side,
Yeah.
that might offer him $350 per year for his lacrosse skills. It's morphed into nothing that we maybe recognize.
Yeah. I think I'll make a difference between the full field games that are played kind of in the summer and in the fall versus the small-sided games, or 7-on-7, 8v8. That's just for kind of skill stuff. So if they're playing tournaments there, that's great. At least they're playing. But for the big tournaments that are out here at Country Day in the fall and just all over the area, I think travel helps. If you more touches, but if you're working with a skilled coach who has skilled assistant coaches and are actually teaching something, I think these guys are getting way, way better than if they were just playing.
You mentioned a website.
Yes.
For a guy that was a communications semi-communications major in college. You've started how long ago? 5, 6 years?
Probably a little bit longer. The first iteration of this was...
And we should mention it's all across Michigan.
All across Michigan.
All one word.
Yep.
.com.
Yep. And the first iteration was Ann Arbor Lacrosse Examiner. Now, this is before I was a full-time teacher. Didn't have a full-time gig anywhere. It was kind of part-time. And my wife encouraged me, you know what, maybe you ought to think about getting a part-time job or something like that. And I said, well, substitute teaching, I need to be available and so on, so I can't really leave the phone. So I found this organization out of Denver, Colorado, of all places, and they said, you know what, you can start your own local website and write articles, and we'll pay you, I don't know, a penny a hit or something like that. So it wasn't really lucrative. But I started Ann Arbor Lacrosse Examiner and wrote out some articles and so forth. And they wanted all original content, and it wasn't a large website. It didn't have multiple pages on it. So when I wanted to just kind of take an article that I had seen and forward it and kind of encourage people to read just about lacrosse, they said, no, you can't do that. And they would shut it down. And I kind of went, I'm not really fond of that. And then I scrolled down on their page, on my page with my name on it. It's got all these clickbait articles with, I don't want to say softcore pornography, but pretty much. And I went, I don't want to be associated with that. So
your church would be mad.
Yeah, I'd be mad.
Yeah, right.
So I said to my wife, what was these troubles? She said, why don't you just start your own website? I went, oh, okay, I'll do that. So started with that and went through a couple of sites to see what was easy. I needed something a little bit easy because I'm, more or less, or trying to make updates daily, sometimes more than once a day, and that's how All Across Michigan got its start.
Now, 7, 8 years later,
yeah,
it seems more viable than like anything else, any other publication. It takes time to build an audience. Is it? What's your mission with it?
The original mission was, there were a couple of other sites around the state that dealt more with stats and figures and breaking down numbers. And I went, I like that because it was the only place to go. I said, well, I need something more visual. I'm a visual guy. I'm a photographer, so I figured I could do that and support my site that way. I wanted it to be visually appealing. You go to my site, I want you to say, wow, this is a good-looking website. I want to stick around and read some stuff. So that's how it got started. So I went out and covered games. I wanted to cover not only the high school and the college game, but also the club scene and give some information for coaches and do all that.
What's your editorial policy? Let me ask the question.
Okay.
Just a fair discussion. We would always stay away from as a newspaper guy, I would always stay away from restaurant reviews if I didn't have somebody who was a trained chef. Because if he went and liked the food, it was looking for advertising.
Yeah.
If you gave him a bad review, then you lost an advertiser, right? So now you've got your own site, which is a platform that the rest of us don't have to expound on any number of subjects that you'd like to expound on.
Right.
So you got to think, you've had to have thought about the editorial content. And I'm curious where you've gone with it.
For the most part, I want to remain positive. The people, the players that I'm covering, boys and girls, men and women, the farthest they go is college. And I am never, ever going to badmouth a college kid, high school kid, unless they make a total goof. Total goof. So I'm gonna remain positive. Remain positive for all the programs. Try and keep the sport in a positive light. I have been known to perhaps rail against the MHSAA on a couple of occasions.
Editorialize.
Yeah.
Which is what columnists do.
Right.
I asked the question because I think that's a fair question, number one, but I also think that people just think you just pull it out of your back pocket. And my point to it is, when I was running a sports section, we had a very simple, professionals were open day all over the place. College coaches were open because they were making money. College athletes were not, unless it was criminal. And everybody was off the table for high schools, again, unless it was of a criminal nature with a public record.
Right.
It just didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You could rail, and again, I could rail about a subject, but I'm not going to
Yes.
pick on Bobby because Bobby is a smart-ass little kid.
Right.
Kind of thing. Just
Right.
never made sense to me. So
Yeah.
I asked the question because sometimes people think it's just your own yellow page to do what you need
Yeah.
to do, and that's just not the case sometimes.
Can't do
There
that.
are some thoughts in it.
Can't do that. I think I've been called on the carpet for, of all things, making predictions for the tournament, the high school tournament. I'll go out and I'll review and I'll take a look at some of the stats and who they played and head to head and records and so forth, and I'll make a prediction. And it's all in good fun. It's not like I'm purposely trying to pick against a team. And I've gotten some emails and so forth from parents saying, "Well, how could you pick against my team or the team that I support because they're the greatest thing?" And sometimes I'm right, and sometimes I'm wrong, and it's okay.
There's nothing wrong with picking games.
Yeah.
And you could make an argument, again, going back to the chef making a review, you've been at the sport for 30 years, so you probably have a little more knowledge than the regular group.
Yeah.
And I'm fairly sure there are people on TV on Friday and Thursday and Wednesday nights, pundits,
Yeah.
who are saying things salaciously to get viewership at 9 o'clock, at 7
yeah.
o'clock.
I think that happens.
So I think there's a teaser part of the
Yeah.
program that sometimes we don't lend a hand to,
Right.
kind of a process, and I think sometimes we miss the point that they're trying to make.
Right, and there's going to be an opportunity, but I'm gonna just for the sake of getting some people to click on the site, and I'll pick somebody out of the blue. It's like, I can't believe that this team is gonna win. So,
It's none of my business, but is it making money?
you know what? I was focused more on trying to make money when I wasn't working full time. Now that I'm working full time,
Doesn't matter.
it really doesn't matter. I do have a number of advertisers that do pay, and I have to way back when I first started out, 3D Lacrosse from Denver contacted me.
Jamie Monroe.
It was, Brooke Farrell.
Right.
He contacted me, called me, said, "We want to get a presence in Michigan. Can we get some advertising?" And I went, wow. And this was the time when I wasn't working full time. I was struggling. I'm thinking, you know what? I may have to shut the whole thing down. So he kept it afloat for a good couple of years.
We also have to think about the first 3 or 4 or 5 years when you were working diligently to put the website up and put all the content up, when nothing was coming in the door financially.
Yeah.
So there's labors of love eventually work
Right.
themselves through. So
Yeah.
I touch on that just because if you have an opinion, and even in this series, I've had a couple of people call me and tell me that I made their friend look bad because of what they said. I tried to point out what they said came out of their mouth. I didn't have
Right.
a loaded gun,
Yeah.
you know, and from the conversation standpoint. And what was an overreaction is never a over. Well, I had 17 phone calls. This is my favorite thing as an editor. I had 17 phone calls from a bunch of people. Who? Well, and it turns out that one person called, not 17.
Yeah.
So I guess this is an editorial point from that standpoint.
Yeah. On the website, what I think, you asked about making money, and it's not really the driving force, but one of the things that I really have loved about the site is developing relationships and meeting people, meeting Hannah Nielsen and Kevin Connery and Chris Colin and all these people around the game. It's just,
Right.
I love it. I love
Give you
it.
access.
Yeah,
Like
I love.
any other press guy.
I love being at the games and taking pictures and kind of getting to know these people. It's fantastic.
Otherwise, where's the site headed? It's the same thing you're doing now. You have less time, right?
Yeah, I kind of do have less time, and it's nice. I've got my calendars out, and I look at my school schedule and coaching schedule and game schedule and try and fit in all these games to cover. And it's headed, it's just trying to build on that, and I'm trying to change some things if I see that it gets a little bit old. You have to refresh to kind of
Now you've
keep it going.
coached hundreds of kids over the last lots of years, 20 years, couple of decades. Now your daughter's playing.
Yeah.
You're taking a different trail. You're now kind of dad in an assistant's role. Is that fair?
Yeah, working with her club, Triumph Lacrosse Club, kind of a goalie coach
What
for
have you
them.
learned? As a parent now, not as a coach.
Well,
What
as
did you
a
learn
parent.
about a parent, being a parent of a player?
It's
It's a different view.
It is, and I'm thinking about the future because now, hopefully, she'll play at the collegiate level, and I'm thinking, wow, this is going to be kind of I'm going to have to make a choice, perhaps, about what I'm going to do. If I'm going to follow her and see her play, or what am I going to do? But
Easy choice.
yeah, oh yeah, it's going to be following her.
There's never been a lacrosse game that meant more to you than your daughter.
Yeah,
I say that for my son. Played 2 sports with me for 4 years, so those are easy choices.
But it's, you ask those questions about the club, and the club that she's playing for, because her high school does not play lacrosse.
She goes where?
Plymouth Christian Academy. They don't play lacrosse. They're smaller than Greenhills, very small.
That's the only outlet she has.
So she has to play club. So the exposure that she gets in this summer tournaments and in the fall, that's the only way that college coaches are going to see her. So she has to play club, and I've had nothing but great experiences out of that club.
Does her athletic prowess, if she's going to look at being a college player, come from wife or come from dad? Come from mom or come from you?
My wife.
That's a rhetorical question.
My wife would say it comes from me, and I'll be okay with that. But her height, thank goodness, comes from my wife.
Because I think your daughter's several inches taller than you are.
Oh yeah, she's 6 feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're not.
No, we'll leave it at that. That's good.
No,
I
get that point.
Yeah.
I guess the last question I want to ask you is kind of a simple one, but it's kind of caught some guys off guard when I've asked it. What's the sport meant to you?
It's kind of grown on me, because back in '77 when I first picked up that stick, I didn't have, the spirit of the stick kind of coursing through my veins and things like that. It was kind of it was always there. It was, in the back of my head, there's this lacrosse bug. I wasn't very good as a player, but I still enjoyed the game. I still enjoyed watching the game whenever I could see it on ESPN. Whenever it was on Memorial Day, I would watch just because it was there. It was always there. And then finally, when it kind of just blew up, in those early 2000s, where I had that opportunity to go back and kind of revisit some of the things that I had saved from Rich Kimball and Nevin Canner and all those things. It kind of just blossomed, and it's been a really big part of my life now. It's not my life, but it's a part of my life that I'm grateful for.
It's a big part of your basement, because lots of by your own admission, being a collector, there's all kinds of memorabilia.
Yeah.
Unless we're Native American, do we really get the spirit of the stick? I'm not saying we can't adopt it.
Yeah.
But unless we're walking through and have played with, in the last 2 centuries, running through the woods with a lacrosse stick, I'm not sure that any of us really have the right to say that we understand the spirit of the stick.
Probably not.
It's not part of our heritage.
It's not.
Doesn't mean we can't love it as much as they do, but I think that's.
Yeah.
Somebody tells me they love to have the spirit of the stick. I just get a little. That's a little heavy-handed to me.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. I mean, I love the game. Love the people that I've been associated with about the game, but it's not in me. It's kind of a tattoo, maybe. I don't know.
Heaven forbid you have balance in your life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think we'll leave it at that. I appreciate, Mike, your time and your effort, and you've been a great coach for a lot of years.
Thank you, Greg.
You've brought a lot of happiness to a lot of folks, including myself. So your friendship's meant more than you can imagine over the years.
Thank you.
And we've had some pretty competitive games over the years. That said, the best of luck. We appreciate your time.
Thanks.
And good luck this spring.
Thank you very much. You too.
Cool, Mike.